Got it. Okay, so we are streaming live on YouTube.
Perfect.
And I trust that you can see the slides, everybody. So thank you for joining us for our last talk of the day on our third day of STEM week. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Alfonsina Arriaga, an amazing biologist who I personally admire very much. And I think this is going to be a great day. So let me say a few words about her. She has a Bachelor in Science in Biology from UDLAP, a Master's in Science from INECOL, and a PhD in Ecology and Population Biology from the Paul Valéry University in Montpellier. Her current adscription is with the Insect Ecology Lab at the University of New England in Australia. She has directed thesis in anthropology, in linguistic anthropology and biology, but also PhD and master's students in Mexico. Her main research line is arthropod biogeography in the Sky Islands, although she also works in islands in general, and she's interested in the study of biodiversity and indigenous languages. She's a national researcher level 1 and has had several grants for over a decade working with insects and dung beetles. She has published papers in journals, worked for several years for the IUCN as a part of the expert group in dung beetles. Currently, she lives in Australia, where she has a project for beetles in woods of Gondwana through a grant that's called the Robine Ennett Wilson Grant, although she continues also to work with the Sky Islands with her students in Mexico. So it is my pleasure again to welcome Dr. Arriaga, and let's give her the floor, okay? So
thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm sorry for the view and everything. This is a day in a biologist lab, and I'm in the field right now. So I'm sorry if it's a bit hectic, but we're gonna make it work. So if you can go through the next slide, please. So just a bit to talk to you about Sky Islands. So it's a terminology that it's not widely used yet, but I refer to Sky Islands as mountains. So mountains are very, very important ecosystems. They occupy 25% of the land area. In them, they inhabit like 85% of the fauna. And for my interest in biogeography, it helps me a lot to have like different theories about how species are distributed, and mainly because the summits of the mountains can work as flora and fauna refugia. Next one, please. So there's all this concept of Sky Island dynamics and how species get into those high peaks and stay there isolated from other elevations. And obviously that allowed the taxa that live in the summits to stay endemic or to evolve there and then became endemic. So all the taxa that inhabits these high mountains, it's usually exposed to this dynamic. That means there are like recent divergence and speciation. Again, as I told you before, this term is mainly used for mountains in the southern USA, but I think it's a terminology that we can use in a lot of mountains in Mexico. And currently, I'm kind of using that terminology too, to pockets of forests that are isolated one from each other. Next one, please. So in Mexico, as you know, we have a lot of things going on geologically and geographically. So we have a lot of neogene events. We have a lot of high elevations going on, and there's not a lot of research on these high elevations. So there are some studies in the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt, mainly with plants, mainly botanists have been working there, and they suggested that there were lower temperatures during the last glacial maximum. So I was very interested in studying that using some high elevation mountains that are in central Mexico. Next one, please. So I did that during my PhD, and then when I was doing a postdoc in Oaxaca, we were very interested in sampling. This is Mexico, Oaxaca. It's the state that you can see like in line. So we wanted to study the differences in the biota that we can find in Sierra Norte and Sierra Sur. Obviously, because I work with dung beetles, I was mainly sampling dung beetles. Next one, please. And we started to sample in all these regions with my students. And I'm mainly interested in this group of dung beetles or boar beetles, which are Geotrupes. And we found that there are two species that are very close to each other. They're like sister species, if you want. They're very, very related. And morphologically also, they have a lot of similar characteristics, but they're not exactly the same. And the interesting part here is that one species, you will find it in Sierra Norte and the other one in Sierra Sur. And as you can see in the map here, it might seem like an island complex, like that the species that live in higher elevations, there's no way that they can move around and actually keep reproducing with the other ones that live in the other Sierra. Next one, please. So then we start to have some models about what happened before. And we can see the green is the vegetation, and it was before, and the blue areas, the like high blue areas, it was like frozen before, and how it changes. So in the past, there was a continuum of forest, all the green area that you can see, the letter A. And we have the theory that the species that gave origin to these other two species used to live in all these continuous. And then what happened? Everything got warmer. Obviously, all the forests started to go up and the populations got isolated. So they started to speciate in their own. And the numbers, the letter C, it's in the future. What's going to happen is that those islands are going to get like minuscule. And some species that actually live in the tops of the mountains, they won't have anywhere else to go. Next one, please. So, okay, if what's happening is that there's an speciation process going on, we wonder if we have species A in Sierra Norte and species B in Sierra Sur, does that mean that if we go to another of these sky islands, are we going to find another of these species, kind of like from the same complex? So we went there and we sampled, and next one, please. And we were very happy because indeed, it's correct. And we found a new species from the same complex that it's different. So we call it Nunciatus because it's like the announced one. We really thought we were going to find it. Next one, please. And even if they look very similar, like in the exterior, there are some characteristics that make them different. So these three species are like sister species. They form what we can call our artencrace, for example, or a complex of species. They have the same origin, but they diversified in a way that there are different species now. So you have the beetle there, and then in the other pictures, what you can see is the genitalia, the male genitalia. So as you know, there are some theories about how the male genitalia had to adjust perfectly into the female genitalia. So that's why sometimes when speciation starts to occur, it will start to show in the genitalia. So in these beetles, even if in the exterior, it's not pretty obvious that there are different species, when we see the genitalia, we can see that they are indeed different. So that helps us to do the differentiation between them. Next one, please. So of course, there's still a lot of future work that I would love to do. So hopefully more students will be interested and all the COVID restrictions will stop soon and we are able to go to the field again. But now I wonder what's going on in these other sky islands we have there. So yeah, there's still more future interesting work to do about that. Next one, please. So while doing all this work in the Oaxacan mountains, which are beautiful and one of the most really incredible places I've ever been, we were to this place, the Zempoaltépetl, which is a sacred Mije mountain, and it's sacred and it's to give offerings for Condoy, which is the good god for the Mijes. And we were having an amazing time there. We were staying with people. We had to ask for permissions to do all the collections, and we started to get a very good relationship with them. Next one, please. So where we were staying, actually, in the house where we were staying, there was this philharmonic band of girls that was rehearsing there all the time. And while talking with them every day after finishing field work, we find out that the name of the band was Kaush. And we start to ask them about the name and what does that mean and why they choose that name. And it was very interesting because they said that actually not everyone knows nowadays the meaning of that word. So next one, please. So Kaush, it's literally means green macaw in Mixe, but it also has these traditions about it will be Congo messenger. So if you saw a green macaw flying, you can use a little stick and send a wish or a prayer or something to the god. But nowadays, it's the name of this philharmonic band. So we were wondering if maybe indigenous languages, of course, we know that they are suffering a lot because they're not spoken a lot. And since the colonization, it's been very hard for people to maintain their languages. And then we wonder, what if every time there's an extinction of something in the field, what if that word also gets lost? Next question, please. Next one. So then we start to work in participation with the local communities. And as I mentioned before, since the beginning, we went there, we asked permission, we explained everything we were going to do. We have some differences because of course we don't speak their language. So it's hard sometimes to explain in our language what do we want to do and to explain and why it is important. We were very lucky and we were accepted to do our work and the community were happy with us to stay there. And they were our guides, they were hosts, and one master student, actually she is from the community and she helped us a lot. And she kind of like opened the door for us to study this amazing place. Next one, please. So of course we had to take into account a lot of ethical considerations, which as biologists, I think we should do every time, but we don't do them often. We should go to every place, ask for permission, talk with the authorities, talk with the people. So they asked me to hike the mountain and to actually ask permission to do my research. So as you can see there in the peak of the mountain, they have these offerings to the god. And every time you go, you bring something to offer and you ask for permission. So we were very lucky to have this family to come with us and everything worked perfectly fine. Next one, please. So then we started to do a research, a proper research. We started it with also Melissa, who was doing her undergrad in linguistic anthropology. So the idea was to make different surveys and life histories in different age groups. So of course we know what's happening with the kids, or we think we know what's happening with the kids, but we wanted to also talk with the elder ones because they have a lot of knowledge. They've been there for several years and they will be able to tell us the story of how everything has been changing. Next one, please. So after doing a lot of surveys and story lives, interviewing people, we validate the results. And for example, Rafael, he said that the last time, like the green macaw, he refers here to the green macaw, it has disappeared. And I haven't seen it since I was a little kid. So that might explain why he knows what kaush means. For him, it's a bird. But nowadays, the guys, the little kids cannot relate to that because that species is not there anymore. And even some of the women in the group, in the same group, they thought that word might be from another language, maybe Zapotec or other one, because they've never heard that before. Next one. So part of the results were in Melissa's undergrad thesis. It was very good. We're still working on that. It was the International Year of Indigenous Language. I think it was 2019. And now we are in the decade of indigenous languages through UNESCO. So we're trying to publish another paper with a more extensive list of species that disappeared and that people don't know anymore. And also adding some species that might have another use, like, there's a huge ethnobotanical knowledge in these mountains. So I think it's worthwhile to keep that alive and trying to raise awareness of how important they are and how we should try to like preserve them too. Next one, please. So for all this part of the work, I obviously am very grateful to the band that opened the door and were very happy and were rehearsing there for us. It was amazing to listen to that every day. To the family Perez Diaz, which obviously they were like hosting us and again, let us be part of the family. All the comisariados, all the responsibles in those communities allowed us to be there, and we really, really appreciate it. And of course, there are technicians and students that always came to do all the sampling with us, and that's highly appreciated. And we managed to fund this project with thanks to the Roofer Foundation and also to CONACYT, the INECOL, and the CIDIR. So this is kind of like the job, part of my research I did in Oaxaca while I was there. But now, as Montse said before, I'm currently in Australia. So next one, please. So I wanted, oh, this is picture so you can see my students, some of my students and the people that help. That all of this work, of course, cannot be done without them. Next one, please. So again, I really think this Sky Island dynamic and theory can be applied to different areas, not just mountains, but also like when we have little pockets of vegetation remnants that might be happening the exactly same thing, like the speciation process might be there. So we have here in Australia, the Gondwana rainforests. Next one, please. Which are protected by UNESCO. They are in the World Heritage List. They are not a lot. They have a very, very patchy distribution, and they have a huge amount of endemic species, flora and fauna. Next one, please. So we're trying to do some studies and some sampling of those beetles. We're doing morphology, but we're also doing DNA to see if indeed what we think is happening is that there are species that we might think are the same now because morphologically they look the same, but maybe they are different species. So that's why we're doing all the eDNA work with them. Next one, please. So this forest, as you can see in the map, they are very isolated one from each other. But then we have the mega fires in 2019, 2020, which makes everything even worse. Because if these pockets are very restricted, now a lot of that vegetation burned. And of course, I imagine you saw in the news, there were a lot of animals that died. The vegetation, it's very damaged. So we want to study now also if there's a difference in the communities that live in the areas that didn't burn at all and in the areas that burn. Next one, please. So we're trying to do studies in burned and unburned areas and trying to compare them. We are hoping that there will be some species that are resilient enough, but some of the native dung beetle species here in Australia are wingless, which means they have wings, but they are not completely developed, so they cannot fly. So they have to walk. So imagine you have to walk in this huge rainforest looking for food and the perfect place to do your burrows, but then everything burns. So that means there's no more food and maybe the soil is not good enough and you don't have everything you used to have. So we want to see if those fires affected them. Next one, please. And this is just a very, very preliminary tree. It's mixing, well, it's putting together a mitochondrial gene and a nuclear gene of this Apterus genus. And we, in theory, until now, there are 3 described species of them. And now, I don't know if you know how to read these trees, but if you start from the left, every time you have like big branches and big separations, that means different species. So we still have to confirm all that, but they came from different pockets. So there's one species that in theory, for example, it's in all New South Wales. But as I showed you in the map before, the remnants of vegetation are very separated from each other. So we don't think there's just one species that stays separated for that long that's still the same. So we really are looking forward to have more information about this. And this little guy also has very specific habits. When I talk about dung beetles, we mainly think about the African dung beetle that will have a big ball of dung. But actually, dung beetles can feed on a lot of different things: mushroom, fruit, decomposition matter. And these little guys use fruit in decomposition to actually make their nest, well, the ball where they're going to lay their egg. And they have a particular ecology and behavior too. And they have mates for life. And they give more food to the egg once they lay them. So they're very particular. We are scared that they might be in danger, so we still have a lot of research to do with them. But yeah, next one, please. So yeah, so this work, it's funded by the Robin and Wilson Foundation, and I am grateful to my lab, of course. And also a part of it, it's funded by Friends of Grasslands, and all national parks allowed us to do all our research here. And I'm very thankful to my students, as always. Next one, please. So yeah, that's all. I don't know if you have any questions.
Guys, now is your moment. If you have any questions whatsoever, now is the time. You raised your hand, didn't you? Okay, so I'm gonna give you this microphone. Please let me know if you can hear the question though.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so hi, my name is Daniel Castañeda, and I had this question because I am an undergrad student, but I have been working with native species here of the university of plant species for the past half year now, and I have also the question of because it takes to my mind, I was in a conference of environmental architectural design, and a lot of it had been with take into example all of these different houses that people over the centuries had built, and they are all houses, but they are all houses in different ways. And I feel like that's also part of the indigenous part that you're speaking, because it's thanks to them living in different spaces that they could come up with different ways of living as their houses. So my question was if plants were also related to that, and like the appropriation of the resources that are located next to indigenous places. So now a lot of, like, if you think of a house, it's probably made of concrete, but I imagine that if for example, in the Sky Islands, you would use different pockets of different wood or palms or materials to make your house. And if architectural design had also something to do with loss in indigenous communities and biodiversity.
Yes, of course. Like all the knowledge, like all the traditional knowledge we are losing, it goes from what they're eating, medicine, which plants they knew were helping to help with something, which trees you can use for construction, of course, that's definitely true. And also they knew exactly how to use them. It's just not the species, but also how many years you have to wait. Maybe they were waiting to have a couple of young ones and leave the very old ones so they have more seeds about that. So I think there's still a lot of knowledge that we don't know. And I think we're losing it in a very high rate because we are not protecting those communities and those environments as we should. We are giving this impression that the best thing is the city and it's speaking Spanish or the language that the majority will speak. And I think we have to go a little bit back, give a couple of steps back and actually acknowledge how important they are and not just raise awareness, but also try to do something actively to try to protect that. So of course, I mean, there are indigenous communities that were able to live in the forest and they have their constructions and they manage to bring water from one place to the other, right? So if we don't manage to get into that knowledge and to ask them with respect, of course, because also what usually happens is that we have this image of the white people that we came and take the information and actually be like taking it for them. We have to stop that idea too. We have to ask them and get in touch with them and give them the opportunity to share all that knowledge with us.
And do you believe we should know before preserving, like be absolutely sure of what we're preserving before doing it, or that we're too pressed for time? And
can you repeat that, sorry?
So, because I know like a lot of conservation efforts you have to do prior studies of what is in the area before doing the conservation. And well, with the current climate crisis, I believe that we may not have enough time to do all that. We may need to preserve first and then like evaluate fully.
It's very hard. I think there's no perfect restoration or conservation efforts because of course you are right that we're losing a lot of things at the same time, but the best restoration and conservation effort is the one we're making. Like the worst thing is not being doing anything. Of course things are changing, but we should try to make an effort. I mean, we are not now in the time to wait to have more research to be sure that we're doing the correct thing. So we need to try to do restoration with native plants, like avoid also this very old-fashioned way of just put trees because we have to, like pine trees or things like that. We need to see which are the species that are native to the area and try to do it in that way, try to study a little bit more. But I think in general, the best one is the one that we're doing. We should stop pretending that we have more time because that's not true.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have another question. So
Yeah.
I'll just move very quickly. Oh, yeah, with the microphone. Can you pass it?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
My name is Kenya. My question is that which is the best part of the research in Australia, because that is actually my dream.
Well, it's very good. I mean, it's very different from the research in Mexico. And I love Mexico. I really love the research there. But I was talking with a colleague, actually, the one that I'm doing field work now. And what I really like from here is it's very safe. So we are two women traveling on our own in a car, setting traps in different national parks. And here everything's fine. I mean, of course, we contacted the national parks, we contacted the rangers, and we are trying to be as safe as possible. But I'm doing things here that I don't know if I will be doing in Mexico. And that is a shame. I mean, I would love to be able to do things there that I'm doing here, but I know I can't. So I think that's one of the best things here. You have like this big backyard and it seems that you can go a little bit everywhere. So you should be more worried about, I don't know, the storms or the weather or the snakes itself, and not by you doing the work. So I think if you really want to, you should try. There's a lot of grants and a lot of universities that I'm sure they will be happy to have you.
Thank you.
Now you know an amazing researcher that resides in Australia and does very interesting things.
Definitely.
Very good. Do you guys have any more questions? Yes, there's one in the back. So I'm going to dash with the microphone super quickly.
Are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just have a question since I'm not really into like biology. My major is very different from that. So there was a term that you used that I wasn't really so sure what you meant by that. It was endemic taxa.
Oh, yeah. That's like a species that just live in one site and you cannot find it anywhere else. So that it makes them more important because imagine if it disappears from there, there's no other place where you can find it. So that's why they're so important. And usually what happens is that they get very, very specific to an habitat. So in Mexico, we have a lot of endemisms in the country, but also to very small areas. So that's what it means.
So is this considered different from an endangered or endangered species because
Yes.
it's specifically to the habitat instead of like the species itself?
Yeah, you will consider a species endangered if there's a specific threat that will, so you can have a species that it's both, that it's endemic, that just lives in a specific area. And if that area, for example, is surrounded by a huge deforestation area, and you know it can burn in some years, or you know that this endemic species has just 200, I don't know, I'm guessing, 200 individuals, then it's also endangered because the probability of it for disappearing is very high. But there are a lot of species that are endemic, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're endangered. Like endangered is once you evaluate all the threats they have. And endemic is that they just live in a very precise site.
Also, for species to be classified as an endemic species, would a lot more research have to like be taken? Because it could also be that you just didn't find that species in another area. Like, how do you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, of course. So, but usually it's like a very endemic species that, for example, a bee that will pollinate another endemic plant. So you know that they are maybe have a very strong mutualism. That means that they are very related and actually evolve together. So that's an example. In some other moments, you can see this species lives here, and that doesn't mean it's endemic. You will have to be sure about that. You will have to sample around, and if you never find it around, it's like, oh, this is endemic. And endemic can be into a very small area, or also like into a country. That can be endemic for a country, for example, or for a bigger area. It can be endemic for the Mediterranean. So it's just that it lives in that area and it's not worldwide distributed.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, another question. Here I go.
Okay, so hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
My name is Luisa. So I have a question regarding the phylogenetic tree you built. So basically you differentiated both species through sequencing.
Yes.
So which genes did you target, were your target for this differentiation, and how you decided which ones would you choose?
Well, usually you try to use genes that someone else uses because you need an outgroup, which is like the one you have in the bottom, which is separated from the one you're using. So you need something extra information. So what is recommended is to use something that the group you're studying are using already. So in dung beetles, for example, it's very common to use a mitochondrial gene, the COI, and then a nuclear one associated. But I know for some arthropods, like we had this tree with mites, and we use the same ones. So you need to use the genes that are already known so you can kind of like compare them. If you cannot compare them, then you cannot construct the tree. Does that make sense? That's kind of like the main thing you need. You need to be able, like when you start with a group, it's good if you start to have your sequences, but you need to be able to compare it with someone else to actually say, yeah, this is different because of that. Or these are so many bases that don't look the same, why, etc.
Okay, thank you.
More questions.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So regarding Mexico and the well, the efforts for conservation. So what do you think about the case of Chiran, the Purepecha group, which
vouch for its independence back in, I don't remember the year, but should we encourage more indigenous communities to strive for these things, or should it be a joint effort with the Mexican government?
I'm not exactly, I don't know the details of Charan, but my experience in Oaxaca, for example, is that it works good to allow the people and the communities to manage their forests, for example. I mean, they've been in that territory for a lot of time. And I think that also, even if I would like to say we should have a joint effort with like federal government, because they are there for that, right? To support those groups and to make conservation efforts possible. Sometimes it's not in the best interest for the communities to start with, and neither for the conservation. So I think in an ideal world, well, where the government will do the right thing, it should be like a common thing that everyone should be working with, that federal government and then the indigenous people and a lot of things going on. But I know that the country, it's not work like that. So I will be very scared of letting the federal government to get into indigenous communities to pretend, because unfortunately that's what happens sometimes. They pretend to protect something and that's not happening. And I'm a big respect for all the indigenous communities, and I think we should let them do what they have to do with their territories.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, I would like to ask everybody in the auditorium to give a big round of applause to Dr. Arriaga. Thank her for a very interesting talk, but also for giving us, I would say, a good hour of her time in the field, which we know it's very, very valuable, and also to allow my fellow biology students to see themselves in a biologist that is working on the field as well. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. Hope you like it.
We did enjoy it a lot. So I will send you a small certificate of participation, because obviously it's going to take a while to send from Mexico to Australia.
Don't
so I'll
worry,
just
no, don't
email it.
worry. Digital, everything's better digital. Yeah.
But thank you very much for joining us today, and for joining our STEM week. I'm very sure that our students really appreciate you joining us today.
Perfect. Thank you. It was my pleasure.